Welcome to Notable Approvals. I'm attorney Amanda Shaffer. I have another exciting case to talk about today. Before I get to the case, I want to do a quick reminder to make sure you like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, like LinkedIn, wherever you get the Shapiro Law Firm news. Make sure you like us and follow us so you don't miss any more of our lives or other informative content that we put out there. If you find this video helpful or know someone who will find it helpful or you think will find it helpful, please make sure to share it. And my last announcement is that on our next Are You Smarter Than Naturalized Citizen? Yeah, oh my God, sorry, my brain is fried. I just had my Asylum hearing that I'm going to talk about. Our game show about Are You Smarter Than Naturalized Citizen will be having episode number 14, October 6th. October 6th. I will put out more reminders, obviously, before then, but mark it on your calendar. We're going to have two new contestants face off to see who can answer the questions for the naturalization, or who could pass the naturalization test first. Okay, so why is my brain so fried? Well, I just finished an asylum hearing in the immigration court, well, in virtual immigration court. We won, very excited, and I wanted to talk about the case immediately because, as I've said before, and I'll say again, that whenever I win an asylum case before the immigration court, it's one of, or whenever I get a client granted asylum in general, it's one of the most fulfilling parts of my job, to see how clients react to their life changing, and forever they'll be safe and protected from something they've been harming for a very, very long time usually. It really means a lot to me, and I get very excited. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So today's case is about a client who's a native and citizen of Nigeria. And his case, I've never had a case quite like his. It's a little unique. And there's a couple different reasons why I've never had a case like this. Number one, they're not easy claims. Number two, there were a lot of issues which I'll get to that we had to overcome, which we were fortunately able to, and many other times these issues aren't able to be overcome. So let's get to the facts of the case then. The client entered with his wife, entered the U.S. in 2017. They both had visitor visas. This was so there's my client, they're both my clients, but the respondent or lead was the husband, and the wife was a writer on his application. So he had never been to the U.S. before. She had been here once in 2016, came for a few months, went back. They had two U.S. citizen children who had nothing to do with the case, except for one respect, which I'll get to in a second. So they filed for asylum within a year of entering the country, so there was no 1-year issue. In order to be eligible for asylum, you have to prove that you are a refugee under the law. And what that means is that you have been persecuted on account of one of the 5 protected grounds, which are nationality, ethnicity, religion, political opinion, in particular, social group. This case was a political opinion case. So they enter the U.S., they apply for asylum. And the asylum office had an issue with the nexus requirement, which basically means, like, you may have been harmed, but just because you were harmed or persecuted doesn't mean you're eligible for asylum or you're going to get it. The reason that you were harmed matters. So the reason that you're harmed, or at least one central reason that you're harmed, has to be related to one of those protected grounds. So if somebody assaulted you because they didn't like you, you don't qualify for asylum. If you were assaulted because you oppose their political beliefs, you may qualify for asylum. So this case is the facts start back in the 90s when my client became a police officer. And if you know anything about police officers in Nigeria or the government in Nigeria, it is known to be a pretty corrupt place, and there are not many honest cops out there. And I'm very happy to say that my client is one of those honest cops that really did fight against injustice, and that's actually why he ended up facing persecution. So he becomes a police officer end of the 90s, early 2000s. I think it was in 1996 or something. And he's assigned to basically the role of, I guess here would be seen as a detective. He goes out and he investigates crimes, and he arrests people if they commit crimes. While he was doing that, doing his job, one day he sees 4 men beating up someone else, just savagely beating someone. So he calls in for backup, arrests the guys. They bring him to the station, and he wants to take the statements. And one of his superiors, when they're about to take the statements, somebody comes in, and they find out that the 4 men are part of this group called the Oduwa People's Congress. I'm going to refer to it, and as it's also known, OPC. OPC is an organization. It's in Nigeria primarily, but it also exists in other African nations. It's considered a Yoruba, which is one of the ethnicities in Nigeria, a nationalist organization. So part of what they believe in is a separate state for their people. They're also considered like a militant organization, a vigilante group. Their platform is we're anti-crime, and your government is not protecting you. You need us to help protect you. So this OPC group is very similar to other vigilante groups in Nigeria. There's one called the Bakassi Boys. And honestly, there's not a lot of difference between them and like groups like Boko Haram who operate in the north, where those groups are more in the south. They do terrorize. They are corrupt. They are intertwined with the government. In some ways, they're intertwined in every way you can imagine. I mean, the informal and informal ways. So, for example, there are local chapters that have contracts with the local government to police the area. There's plenty of politicians who affiliate with them, are members, or were members, or pay members for protection. They do things like they set up illegal highway taxes by stopping cars and collecting money. So kind of runs the board of what these types of vigilante groups, terrorist groups, whatever, depending on who you talk to, is the different description you're going to get of them. But essentially, these guys have an agenda, a political agenda. They have a lot of political influence. There's millions of people in the organization in Nigeria, and anybody who opposes them in any way, shape, or form becomes a target. So the most difficult thing in this case was proving that the persecution that my client faced was based on an actual or imputed political opinion, not just because he was doing his job. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. So what happens to my client is that, I didn't finish my definition of asylum. Let me just finish that real quick. So again, this has to be persecution on account of one of those protected grounds, and your persecutors have to be a group that the government, it either has to be the government or a group the government is unable or unwilling to control. And then finally, there has to be a favorable exercise of discretion. And what that means is that you might meet all the requirements for asylum and prove that you're eligible, and still not get granted asylum because the judge decides not to. Now, generally, if you have good moral character, if you don't have a criminal history, they're going to exercise discretion favorably. If you have any types of arrest, criminal convictions, if you lie, there's misrepresentation, things like that, that's when asylum gets denied for those reasons. And I'm bringing that up because this is something I'll get to shortly that was relevant in this present case. I'm going to try to keep this this live shorter rather than longer, but there's a lot to this case given how many years the facts span. And I'm excited and I'm tired, so I'm not thinking as clearly. I'm tired because I prepared my butt off for this case, because I always do. And I always describe it as getting ready for like a boxing match. Like you get all amped up and then you finish, you get that knockout, and you're like, I can relax. So, the client sees these 4 men beat him up, brings them, beating up someone else, so therefore committing a crime, brings them to the police station. And one of the people higher up in the OPC finds out, because there are policemen who are OPC, finds out that these 4 men who are OPC was arrested, goes to the police station and tells them, you need to release them. And there are a lot of police officers that are very afraid of them and say, okay, I don't want any trouble, we'll release them. Now my client was like, no, they committed a crime, they need to be prosecuted. So he did not release them, he charged them, he took their statements, charged them with the crime, and did his job, went on his way. So it turned out those 4 men ended up their charges were dismissed, and they were released by someone else who listened to what the OPC wanted. But a few months later, my client, actually, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. So that all happens, and he was threatened then by the OPC that he's going to regret it, that he didn't let them go. Right after that happens, his superior calls him and says, look, you need to put in a transfer because you're not safe anymore. The OPC is mad that you said, like, the guy who came to the station, he's high up there and he thinks you are undermining him, and they are going to come after you. So they transfer him to another unit in another state. They actually transferred him to a unit that investigates corruption, police corruption, any type of official corruption. So he's working in his new unit for only a few months when he is attacked. He's driving, he gets blockaded by some buses, and he gets out of the car. He sees the guy who had come to the police station. He knew it was the group also because they wear like red headbands to signify their members. And they get out, like a bunch of men get out, and they just start beating him, and they knock him unconscious. And 2 months later, he wakes up at basically in what was essentially a hospital. And he was very, very lucky. Someone he was friendly with, who is in the OPC, but in like a different faction of the OPC, like somewhere else in Nigeria, had overheard that they were going to take my client out that night and knew the details. So they tried to call him and warn him, but when they called and someone else picked up the phone and said, never call this number again, they knew to be worried, and they went out looking for him. And they ended up finding him unconscious in a pit, left to die. And fortunately, even though he was unconscious, he was still alive. They brought him to the hospital. He had to get transferred a couple of times because of how serious his condition was. But fortunately, he eventually regained consciousness 2 months later. When he regained consciousness, he immediately learned that the OPC, their plan was not only to kill him, but to kill him and frame him for murder. And when he hears this, he hears that he's being accused of murdering someone who was killed the night that he was beaten unconscious. So he's like, well, obviously there's no way I could have done it. I got to clear my name. And he was warned, don't do that. They're not going to just let you go. They're not going to believe you. They're out to get you. So he, like I said, my client was one of probably a very small number of policemen in Nigeria who really are honest and courageous, really honest person. So he went there. He explains, look, here's my proof. Like this is the guy who found me. Why do you think I did this crime? Well, they thought these OPC members said you were the murderer. Nobody saw him do it. There really wasn't any evidence that pointed to him doing it. It was all circumstantial, and in fact, even the circumstantial evidence was tenuous at best. Really, the judgment, what ends up happening, I'll get to his criminal case second. So obviously there was a criminal case. They didn't just let him walk out of there. They end up detaining him. They detain him, but don't charge him with anything, because again, they didn't have the evidence. But they detain him for a year without charging him. And yes, that is against the law, against Nigerian law, to hold someone that long without detention. In the U.S., you're not allowed to really be held for, I think that's 24 hours without being charged. Because you have to be brought before the judge, or they have to release you. But in Nigeria, it's not that quick, but it's definitely not. It doesn't take a year for that to happen. So he really was being held in terrible, horrible conditions, for that year. He wouldn't even eat the food they gave him, because one of his other detainees said they're going, or not one of the detainees, one of his fellow police officers who knew about the plans were like, look, they're going to try to poison you. Don't eat anything from anyone you don't know. So he was able to only eat food when his sister or his cousins or someone was able to go there and bring him food, and he was not always allowed visitors either. So he finally got brought before a judge a year later, when basically another detainee who heard about a situation told his lawyer, that guy told his own lawyer about it. And then his own lawyer was like, all right, let's get you before a judge. And he finally got his trial. So he was put on trial for murder. It lasted for about 2 years. He was detained the entire time that he was on trial. And at the end of the 2 years, he was fully acquitted of murder. And the judgment from the court, which was actually part of our record, one of the documents we submitted in support of his claim, the judge wrote in there that there really was zero basis to accuse him in the first place. That there was embellished evidence by the prosecution. There was nothing that connected him. The person was murdered by a single gunshot wound to his head. My client didn't have a gun. They couldn't find a gun. It was, things like that. There really just wasn't any evidence. So he was like, all right, well, I can't stay where I am now. He tries to relocate. He goes to Lagos. And when he was in prison, that's where he met his wife. She was a member of the church that would go and meet and help the inmates. And that's how they met. And she knew his whole story. So when he got out and he needed help, he went to the church. And then he contacted her, and she kind of helped him at least find a place to stay for a little. In 2010, they ended up getting married. So here's where the case starts to get a little hard. Now, first of all, you have, well, we'll get to everything, but let me just tell the facts. That's probably the easiest. So he's kind of living a very low key, under the radar life. What I mean, he literally put disguises on when he went outside. He went to work, he went home, he was even afraid sometimes to go to church. He didn't really fraternize or socialize with others. He kind of just went about it. He was still very fearful, but as long as OPC didn't know where he was, at that point they knew he was released, but really didn't know where he was. he could stay safe as long as they didn't know that. So, like I said, he gets married in 2010, and everything is okay. I mean, it's not a great existence to have to be in hiding all the time, but he's safe. His wife is safe. His wife was given a trip from her work to visit the U.S. She does. She gives birth to their first child, and then she comes back to Nigeria. The clients are Christian, and part of their tradition is to do a baby naming ceremony. And the husband, or the male client, said to the female client, maybe we shouldn't be doing a big public announcement, because I still am really scared they're gonna, OPCs, because who's actually even more powerful than when he was first released from prison. I'm afraid if they find out where I am, now our safety's gonna all be in jeopardy. And she's like, it's been so long, they probably forgot about you. If we put in, we have a party at the house and with the church, I'm sure it won't be a problem. So they do it, and they put in the paper this naming, the baby naming ceremony. A couple weeks or a month later, my client's driving, and his mechanic kind of sees him and flags him over. And he says to him, I heard, basically he had heard that the OPC found out where he is now, because of that announcement, and he is not safe and needs to leave. So at that point, and he also knew that this was true, because one day when he was at the supermarket, he heard an announcement that basically they were in someone's car in the parking lot. There was a bunch of men out there vandalizing the car and burning the car. And that was my client's car, and he ran out the back, and that's how he knew, okay, they know where I am now, they can find me, and now we're not safe. So it took, 6-7 months for him. His wife had the visa, but he didn't. He had to get one. And while that was going on, he wasn't staying in one place. He was kind of moving around a lot. Then he entered the U.S., applied for asylum. So, like I said, there's a couple of specific issues in this case that got me overly concerned for no reason. But that's how I am. I like to over-prepare. I'm ready for anything. But the first being that he was released from detention in 2007. And he testified that, hey, until 2016, really, I didn't have any problems. So that's about a decade. Where is it because they didn't know where he was, or forgot about him, or didn't care about him, or what was the deal? And that's one of the big problems I see. I've had it with cases in the past where when a lot of time passes between one of your incidents of persecution or your last incidents of persecution and when you leave the country, that's something that can really be hard to overcome sometimes. Like I said, but my client, because he credibly testified about what he was doing during that 10-year, almost 10 years time period, and explained that, look, we were never really safe, but they didn't know where we were. And as soon as they knew where we were, they came after us. So I was worried about that. The second thing I was worried about was that because he is a police officer in a country that is known for corruption as well as a widespread abuse by people in positions of power, especially policemen. And you cannot qualify for asylum if you've ever violated someone else's human rights. So if you unlawfully arrest somebody, if you unlawfully assault somebody, even if you're acting in your official capacity, if it's seen as a human rights abuse, you're seen as a persecutor, you're not getting asylum. So I had to walk him through all of it. I knew this was an issue the government was going to bring up, so I flat out said, have you ever killed anyone? No. Have you ever violated anyone's human rights? No. Have you ever accepted a bribe? Things like that. I kind of went through, very similar to what the security questions are if you apply for a green card, to have him the judge be able to hear him and see him say the answers to these questions, that he's never done any of those things. Another issue we had was that he had one arrest in the U.S. And if you look at the charges, they can be problematic. He was charged with some type of sexual abuse. It was like forcible touching or something. The case was dismissed. He was falsely accused. But again, when you're in immigration court, the fact that your criminal case was dismissed doesn't mean it can't hurt you. So because it was dismissed, the only way it could hurt him in this situation would be if the judge thought he actually did it. Then that could be a knock against his good moral character, and the judge could deny the asylum because of that. Now, when you apply for asylum, you also apply for withholding of removal and withholding under the Convention Against Torture. It's all one application. Asylum, as I said, is discretionary, whereas withholding of removal and CAT are mandatory. And so the difference is that if you prove all the elements, which are very similar for those three things, it's a matter of how much evidence you need, basically. If you prove them, withholding of removal or CAT, the immigration judge has to grant it, your case. They don't have a choice. Excuse me. So I knew at the very least he would be granted that, but the problem is for his wife is that she was on his application. She didn't have her own claim. So if he did not get granted, when he got granted asylum, she got granted asylum. But there's no derivative grants for withholding of removal or CAT. So if he was granted withholding of removal or CAT, she would have had a removal order. So obviously we were going for asylum, and good moral character was very much a concern for us. So, this case, all of these points of contention. So we have the arrest in the U.S., the fact that he was accused of murder can become an issue too. The fact that he was a police officer in a country known for police abuses, and the fact that he had remained in his country for so long after he was his persecution, or one of the incidents persecution, because there was the last incident which he came here for. Because of all of those things, I was worried about the case. I'm always worried about the case, even when I don't have to be worried about the case. But we were able to address all of those problems. We came right out from the beginning. The first thing I did was ask him about the criminal case. I wanted to I believed everything my client said about it, that he was falsely accused. And especially when you see serious criminal charges like that end up, like, my client did not even have to plead guilty or admit any facts. He just had to go to court, and he didn't know the difference between an outright dismissal and ACD. There's not really that much of a difference. There can be a difference. For the purposes of this explanation, for him, the difference is it could have affected his asylum case. So I had him come out and just basically say all of that. And because I knew my client was credible when he testified, I kind of just gave him a little more liberty than I give other clients sometimes when they're on the stand, to just talk. Because everything he said, I believed and he believed. And I always tell clients, you don't have to be perfect in your testimony. If you get a few questions, like if you get some of the facts mixed up or some dates, it's okay. It depends why and how. And in his case, every date I asked him about, pretty much at first he said the wrong date. Now, remember, this man was unconscious for 2 months. And a lot happens to your brain when you're unconscious for 2 months. And he said he's had medical problems since then, but proving brain injury, I wasn't even going to attempt that. But fortunately, I was able to follow up and say, are you sure? Because I knew the timeline very well. And I knew that he actually, the dates he gave, didn't make sense at all. So it wasn't even close where he's making it up or just forgetting. He just made mistakes. And then he realized it, corrected himself, and it was great. We did have his wife ready to testify. She couldn't testify to everything, but she could testify to them what happened that time period after he was released, and if they were safe, and like how they remained there for that time period and what changed and all that. So we were ready to have her back him up if needed, but her testimony wasn't needed. In fact, my closing argument wasn't needed. After all my questioning, the government's questioning was pretty brief, and at that point, the government basically said to the judge, they rarely will just agree to it, but the government attorney deferred to the judge after that, which meant if the judge is going to grant it, they're not going to appeal it or reserve appeal. They're just going to agree what the judge says. So because they did that, that was their position when I didn't have to do a closing argument, and I love closing arguments. But it makes my job a little easier and less stressful, and I'm always ready for the next one. But to watch my clients' faces when the judge finally granted the case, it was just pure joy. Although one of my colleagues thought he heard somebody like screaming in agony, but it was joy screams, and they, now they know they never have to worry about going back. So I actually talked a little way longer than I planned to, but I'm excited. This was a case that a week ago, if you would have asked me about, I would have been like, it's going to be tough, and that's why I prepared so extensively for it. I mean, trust me, for every case I do, but I do go the extra mile just to be ready for anything in a case like this where I'm not sure how the other side is going to come to court and what they're going to really be focused on, and what and because whether I thought they were going to be worried he would even have a political opinion because he was acting in his official capacity as a police officer. So I had all the case law that said that was a political opinion, and I didn't need any of it, but I have it if I need it in the future. So that's great. So yeah, like I said, today was a great day. It was a great trial. I'm so happy for my clients. In 1 year from today, they will be eligible to get their permanent residency, and then in 5 years from today, they'll be eligible for naturalization. And they do now have 2 children who are both U.S. citizens, and they never have to worry about their family not being safe. So a lot was said here, but if you're watching still, thank you. But this is a great case to learn about how even issues even cases that have some of these red flags, like I said, for example, being a police officer in a country like Nigeria, that doesn't by any means mean you can't overcome it. And it shows, we have a question. You don't need to apologize. Yes, we are located in New York City, in Manhattan, near Wall Street. But we do represent clients all over the country and all over the world. This one was in New York, though, yes. So what was I saying? I get distracted and then I forget. So yes, it shows that just because there is that problem, some of these issues, it doesn't mean they can't be overcome. And at the end of the day, it's how you are prepared for it. But what's most important, and so many of these cases, I see all the time, it comes down to credibility. If you can get up on the stand and be honest and come off as being honest, then you're putting yourself in a pretty good position. And that's what this case came down to. The judge and the government attorney, for that matter, believed everything my client said, as did I. And that's why his case became easy. I could take all the credit in the world if I want, but I'm not going to, because I did a lot of work. But a lot of the work I did, I ended up not having to showcase because of his honesty. So that is all today. for notable approvals. I will have another one next week. Hopefully, I'll have some time to do one. Don't forget to like us and follow us on the Insta, the Facebook, YouTube, so that whenever that next one is, you don't miss it. Please share this video if you found it helpful or know someone who would. And of course, October 6th, as I stated earlier, October 6th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time will be our next Are You Smarter Than a Naturalized Citizen? I will post announcements about that as well soon, so keep your eye out for that. And of course, as always, my contact information, Olin, or that way, I'm not really sure, across the bottom of the screen for most of you. Instagram, you got to go to our bio page. So we are available. Please call us, email us if you would like help with your immigration case or your legal matters as well. So thank you all for watching. Have a great day.